Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Jeanette with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services with Contra Costa House. Welcome to our CoC training on racial equity and homelessness. Before we get started, I'm going to note, and I'm going to repeat this in the chat, we will provide a link to the recording, and we will be sending out slides. This question will come up multiple times throughout the training in the chat. I can guarantee you I will repeat that information. But just know that we will be providing a recording and slides. And in the interest of time, I'm actually going to turn things right over to our home-based trainers, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We are going to keep everyone muted unless there's an opportunity for questions and answers, but just so that there's no chaos in the background. So if I mute you, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to cut down on chaos. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to home base.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Burns. I'm with Homebase. Really excited to be here. And want to just start by, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to start by introducing our team here. So we are from Homebase. We're a nonprofit. You probably have seen some of us before. We do a lot of work in Contra Costa County, supporting the continuum of care. And today we're here to do a training on racial equity and homelessness. So there's 4 of us here from Homebase that are going to be your facilitators. Just going through who you see in the photos. We have my colleague, Mark Mora, my colleague, Mihir Vora, and my colleague, Nicole McCrae Dickerson. And you'll be hearing from all of us throughout the morning. It would be great if folks, I see some people are already doing it, but if people could put their name and their organization in the chat, it would be great just so we have a sense of who's joining us today. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of what this training is going to be about. What we're going to start out with is some community agreements. We're going to go through, we're going to talk about 10 things about race, do some equity definitions and key concepts. So you'll see that in the training today, there's a lot of foundational elements that are really important in terms of why we're even talking about this, and then making sure we're on the same page about what we're talking about and when we use specific terminology. We're going to be talking about moments in history that have been pretty defining in terms of setting the trajectory for where we are in terms of ongoing discrepancy in housing access and homelessness. We'll be talking about racist structures and policies that establish housing equality and inequality. As I said, we will also talk about why, and then talk about next steps and what kind of additional training and support you all would like to see in the future. Okay, let's go on to the goals and objectives of today's training. So what we're looking to do is gain an understanding of key definitions and concepts related to racial equity. Look at how structural racism has created and perpetuated housing inequality historically and now. Explore how to center BIPOC residents, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the homeless system of care, and discuss how to advance race equity in our daily work to end homelessness. So we know you're all here as part of your all work as service providers working to support people who are experiencing homelessness. And we're going to be talking a lot about the intersection between race and homelessness. So to give you a sense of what you can expect from us as trainers and what we are asking you all to expect from each other as well, and what we expect from you all, we have 3 basic expectations. If you could go to that slide, please. So number 1, the training will combine learning as well as action-oriented discussions. This training is participatory, so we ask you to join us on camera when you're able. Do mute yourself when you're not speaking so that we can all hear the presenters. And definitely use the chat to ask questions, to communicate with each other. There will definitely be opportunities where we ask people to come off mute. We're going to have other ways of engaging folks. So We definitely look for participation. And then respectful engagement is the last basic expectation. We want to recognize that every community and every individual may be at a different place in where they are understanding and engaging with racial equity. So let's all respect one another by listening and also offering feedback when others share. So I want to talk about group agreements. As we've said, we're talking today about racial equity and homelessness, a very essential topic and also an intense topic. We do have a set of group agreements that we really ask and invite all of you to engage in. So I'm just going to go over these one by one. The first one is to be here now. So I really ask you to look around your space, think about what you could do to put away any distractions. If you need to turn your phone off, put off any email or anything that you have up on your screen that could be distracting. If you need to go grab yourself a glass of water, whatever to make yourself comfortable so that you can really be present and engage for the next 2 hours, and really make good use of this time as a learning and sharing opportunity. We also ask that you practice self-focus. So use I statements, reflect on your own experiences, your own observations. That's going to be really important. We ask that you practice mindful and active listening. So, really seeking to understand each other and not making assumptions, but really listening to what we are saying. We ask that you participate to the fullest of your ability today. And we know that sometimes that means listening and absorbing information. Other times it may be speaking up more. Directly related to that is to move up and move back. So really taking into consideration, are you someone that typically speaks a lot during a training? Are you someone who is in a position of privilege? Okay, a little technical difficulty there. So if you're someone who's in a position of privilege based on your race, your gender, your position in an organization, think about this as an opportunity to maybe step back and leave space for other people that historically and currently might not be in positions of power and privilege, and give them an opportunity to speak. Everyone has the right to pass. So participation, we want this to be voluntary and comfortable. Well, maybe not comfortable, but voluntary in terms of how you participate. Do choose courage over comfort. So any conversation about race and racial equity is going to bring some discomfort, and that is part of the process, part of the growth and importance of these conversations. We ask that you assume positive intent from each other, and at the same time to also own your own impact. So being aware that we can have our intentions may be one thing, but we can have a different impact than what we intended, and to take responsibility for that. We also want to practice both and. So this is really not limiting ourselves to either or thinking, but really trying to hold different concepts in our minds at the same time. So that could be hard work and rest, solitude and community. You are enough and you can get better. Excuse the barking dogs. And basically, we're trying to hold the idea that we can be more than one thing at the same time. And it also makes room for multiple people's experiences. So it's not basically ranking whose experience is better or worse, but really to allow ourselves to feel what we are feeling and also hold space for others. We ask that you reframe anything from blaming or shaming of yourself or others. And again, we are here to learn and share together. And lastly, what is said here stays here, but what we learn here leaves here. So we really ask that you, respect the privacy of other participants and their stories, but also carry with you the concepts and learnings that we are doing today. If you could go to the next slide, Mark, just going to pause for a moment and just ask, how is everyone? We'd love to hear from you about how you're feeling coming today into today's racial equity training. And Mark, if you don't mind putting into the chat, great. And on the slide, great. So we have something called Mentimeter, which many of you are probably aware of, but you can either scan with your phone, the QR code there, or you can put into your web browser menti.com and then the code 8159600. And Mark, are you able to share the Mentimeter as people are commenting? Great. So we have here, how are you feeling coming into this racial equity training? And we have different options. So just take a closer look at this. Love this. Okay. So basically, how are you feeling? Which of these expressions describes how you are feeling today? Are you feeling really happy and excited? You're feeling a little maybe a little cringy, maybe absolutely terrified, scared. There's all kinds of different things that you could be experiencing right now, or maybe you're feeling something else that's not captured. Again, we have the both and experience here. So great. Yep, it is Monday. Thank you. Great. So I'm seeing a pretty big range here, but overwhelmingly, we seem to be some positives. Again, there's no wrong answers here. But this is great to see how people are coming into this space. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to now pause. Just want to make sure before I hand it off, any questions or anything that folks want to put into the chat. Great. I'm seeing people reflecting in the chat as well. I see some more folks that are saying ones and twos. Great. Terrific. Great. Well, thank you. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Michelle. Hey, everyone. Good morning. I want everyone to take a deep breath. We are talking about racial equity today. And so we want to start off our conversation a little bit with HUD's goal to end homelessness and talk about what that looks like for HUD in different ways. So next slide, please. So there is a federal goal, in case you didn't know, to end homelessness. I'm sure we all know that. We were all working in this space. And this plan, there's a federal strategic plan to end homelessness, which was launched by the United States Interagency Council of Homelessness, USICH, in 2010. HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, which is really dedicated to or over part of the housing authorities, public housing authorities here in the United States, is committed to ending homelessness with partnership with the CPD office, which is the Office of Community Planning and Development. And so they've been coordinating with one another. Homebase has done some racial equity trainings for public housing authorities in coordination with CoCs across the country to advance racial equity in these spaces. Next slide, please. So HUD's commitment is to fight and end homelessness, and it focuses on both HUD and USICH. And the research has shown that Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, experience homelessness significantly higher and disproportionately rates than whites. And so with that, in that effort, we are addressing racial disparities, HUD, USICH. And so there has also been an executive order that the White House put out to advance racial equity, so everyone is on the same page. And so we want to make sure that as we move forward today, that we keep this in mind, that this is a national initiative across this great nation. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? For you, for me, this is a system. We're going to get more into that, what that looks like, how that feels, what that does to folks across this country. And we need to really pay attention of intent versus impact. So we know that there are racial disparities, that across this country, it's historic, systematic racism and discrimination, and that these impacts and outcomes affect people who we serve on a day-to-day basis. And so policies and practice appear to be, even though they weren't intended to be, the problem. And we all know that. And so we're just going to discuss some of that today. So what's your role? Next slide, please. So as part of the CoC, why are you responsible for addressing these inequities? And here are some of the reasons why. But most importantly, housing and homelessness response systems must ensure that we are not contributing to these inequities, and we should work to identify ways to reduce them. And so today, these are the conversations that we're going to start. And most importantly, we need to know, what are the 10 things about race that we hear all the time? Next, actually 2 slides, Mark, sorry. I'm moving a little fast. We only have 2 hours, and this training is very high level. At the end, we're going to talk about what we want to see, what you as a community want to see moving forward as we talk about racial equity in Contra Costa County. I, during my trainings, like to have audience participation. So we're going to be very careful, try not to step on one another, but I would like some folks to come off. I'm going to need 10 people to come off mute and read these 10 things about race, one at a time. Who's going to be first?
Race is a modern idea.
Thank you.
Race has no genetic basis.
Humans as species don't exist.
Skin color really is only skin deep.
Most variation is within, not between races.
Slavery predates race.
Race and freedom evolve together.
Race justified social inequalities as natural.
Race isn't biological, but racism is still real.
Colorblindness.
Go ahead.
Colorblindness will not end racism.
Race justifies social inequities is natural.
Awesome. Wow, that was up. How many people are on this call? It's a lot.
150.
150, and you all 151. Thanks, Hope. So that was great. I need you all to resonate on those statements as we go through core definitions and concepts. Again, I'm going to ask that we do this as a community and would have someone read the first definition. Mark, could you advance the slides? Thank you. Race.
Race, a false classification of humans created by Europeans using white as the model of humanity and the height of human achievement for the purpose of establishing and maintaining power and privilege, People's Institute for Survival and Beyond.
Intersectionality. Thank you.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality
or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves. They create obstacles that are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Kimberly Crenshaw.
Thank you. So these are just foundational. We're going to watch a video in a few moments, but I just want you all to keep these in mind because they're going to be really important as this video plays. We have a couple of more slides of definitions. Can someone please? Disproportionality. Next slide, please, Mark.
Disproportionality, the ratio between the percentage of persons in a particular racial or ethnic group at a particular point or experiencing an event compared to the percentage of the same racial or ethnic group in the overall population.
Thank you. BIPOC.
Black, Indigenous, and all people of color.
Thank you. Lived X, people with lived experience or expertise.
Refers to stakeholders with lived experience or expertise of homelessness. X creates space for those who have experienced homelessness to self-identify as an expert or as someone who has knowledge due to that experience.
Thank you. White dominant culture.
Describes how the idea of whiteness was created through the erasure of distinct white people, and their practices, beliefs, and culture have been normalized over time and are now considered standard.
Thank you. Next slide. Systematic racialization.
A dynamic system that produces and replicates racial ideologies, identities, and inequities. Also, the well-institutionalized pattern of discrimination that cuts across major political, economic, and social organizations.
Thank you. Weathering.
An accumulation of lifelong physiological stress that describes the deterioration of health as a result of being exposed to systemic racism.
Thank you. Whiteness.
Refers to the way that white people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared, and non-white persons are viewed as inferior or abnormal.
Thank you. Tokenism.
The practice of doing something only to prevent criticism and give the appearance that people are being treated fairly or included.
Thank you. White fragility. Redefine.
Refers to feelings, reflective productive response, a way for a white body to avoid experiencing the pain of its historical trauma inflicted by other white bodies.
Thank you. Next slide, please. I need everyone to take a deep breath together. 1, 2, 3. I want to see shoulders up, shoulders down. So from all these definitions that you all have so eloquently described to us, racism is a complex system of racial hierarchy and inequalities, which includes internalized and interpersonal racism at the micro level and structural racism at the macro level, often understood to be a conscious belief. So this slide lays out how complex racism is, where it is found, how it is experienced. In one slide, it's all there for you. Again, these slides will be given to you at the end, and we're also gonna maybe hopefully unpack some of these things, because again, this training is a very high level and we wanna make everyone in the community aware of the things that are, that deal with racism. So Mark, can we play the video? This video will give you all a understanding of systematic racism. I love this video because it incorporates all those definitions, if not most of those definitions that you all just read to us. And it also gives you, it has cute pictures and color. So Mark is gonna play the video for us. And then I think we're gonna have some time for some discussion after a few more slides. Thanks, Mark.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
That should be the training right there, but it's not. As Bart gets the next, puts the slides back up, it's really important for us to really understand the differences between equality, equity, and inclusion. So Mark, if you could just go to the picture slide, which I think is 23, it would be helpful. We can go to the next one. Those are a lot of words. I like the pictures. So thanks, Mark. So as you can see on the left, this is most of the reality that we see in some places, right? One gets more than the other needs. And so there's this huge disparity. So then we talk about equality, where everyone benefits from the same supports, but it's still not equitable, right? Or inclusionary. So then we get to equity. So everyone gets the support that they need, which produces this equity. But then we really want justice, right? Where there's no offense and everybody can see the game. And we also want inclusion, where everyone is included, everyone is participating, and all the barriers are removed. So this picture really speaks to what we know, where we've been, and where we're trying to go. Next slide. And I'm going to turn this back over to Michelle and Mark.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of feedback in the chat that was a very powerful video. I agree with that. So what we'd like to do now is give you all an opportunity to share. And we have a couple of different ways doing this, depending on how you'd like to have, how you'd like to express yourself. So people are welcome to put things into the chat. They can come off mute. And we also have this Padlet. And what this is a place where you can actually engage, put your thoughts on sharing an experience about one of the concepts or terms that we've just talked about, and how they really hit home for you, or another reflection that you have of the concepts that we've discussed so far. So, Mark, do you mind sharing the Padlet so people can see what it is? And then I'm going to put into the chat what the you can either, again, go onto your phone and screen the QR code, or you can do the this link. 1 second. So as you can see, here's one on your screen. You can see here that we have our first one, and the concept that really hit home for the person who shared is racism. It says, I am Black. When I was 12 years old, a 3-year-old little white girl told me I was dirty because of my color. Are there others that would like to?
The link isn't working, just FYI.
Oh.
For me, anyway. I don't know if other folks are having this issue. I just get a 404 error.
Oh, okay. Try again. Yeah, that's very strange, because that is, I am sharing the exact link and I'm also getting the error. So if folks can just give me one. Okay. I'm going to just take a pause for a moment. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to fix the link. Oh, thanks, Nicole.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, it was missing. It just ended at 1.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Great. So now you can see, so you can put things onto the Padlet. Again, you can come off mute. or you can put things into the chat. And I'm going to be sharing, reading this, and if anyone, after posting things, if there's anyone who would like to also share it aloud and talk more about it, it would be great. Okay, so here we have whiteness. Used to use the term Caucasian to describe white people. Then I realized how that term was coined by a racist scientist and how it lumps different people into a false group, and also avoids people using the word white. I no longer use that word. Tokenism. I worked so hard to get to my level of professional skill. When I started working with a white VP, she would use my Latino name for housing applications, but wouldn't invite me to speak with her white partners, and would often have me take on the conversations with people of color partners. Maybe less racism and more classism, which has the same roots. Discrimination due to strong Asian accent. Thank you. Nicole has also shared the QR code in the chat for people to share. I'm going to just take a moment and pause so people can write what they would like to. And if anyone in that time would also like to come off mute, please feel free. For folks who have put things on the Padlet, is there anyone who would like to read theirs? Completely up to you, but if anyone would like to come off mute and share it, now is you an opportunity to do that. See here, someone growing up in the Northeast surrounded by direct racism, friends using the N-word, embracing stereotypes that made me uncomfortable and motivated my leaving the East Coast altogether. Someone else says, I'm Latina. I was laid off. Sorry, I moved. And my white coworker told me I could clean her house like all your people do. I just also want to acknowledge and thank people for sharing this, and acknowledge how that this is also, I know, can be painful to share these experiences. I really appreciate folks' openness. My mother told me that my grandfather gave her and my aunts and uncles quote unquote common or white names so they would be able to get better jobs. Yes, I'm seeing needing to potentially change a mood. Yes, this is a very, this is definitely, people are being very open and honest about the experiences that they're having. Yeah. Seeing several things about people who are mixed race, people of color saying she's a white girl, white people saying she's a black girl. Someone whose mom used to always be asked if she was adopted because she's mixed Latina and white. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot in terms of experiences of children and showing how this is something that we're all raised with. We're raised with race, and it's something that is communicated to us and taught to us immediately. My daughter, who at the time was 4 years old in preschool, asked me, Mommy, what is the color of my hair? I answered brown. She said a girl at school said she didn't want to play with her because my daughter was not blonde. This baby girl must have learned this from the adults who are raising her. Mhm. Mhm. When a white person's racist tendencies are brought to the attention of a supervisor, but the white supervisor makes excuses. Mhm. When my son was little, people would question, sorry, I lose it when it moves. When my son was little, people would question me being his father because he was biracial, or the many looks and reactions when me and my family go out to restaurants or on trips. Yeah. Mhm. People reflecting on white privilege. Mm. Yeah.
Can we just say an experience?
Yes, please.
So when me and my cousin were in 6th grade, we used to get pulled out of our class, and we were put with like a group of white kids, and we were playing like Foursquare, and they would pull the ball and they'd say, "You're out." And I'd say, "Why?" And they'd say, "Don't question authority." And like they did this every week. And so I told my dad, and he's like, "They can't do that." So he went to the school and complained, but I think they were just trying to make us bow down. I don't know. It's pretty bizarre.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, I'm really noticing how much of this is around children, experiences of us as children and what we have learned as children, what our children have experienced and are learning. Things, as explicit as using the N-word, and then kind of everything where it's more implicit and maybe subtle, but also clear. Mm-hmm.
When I was 50, which was 8 years ago, I was working at a data center in Portland, Oregon, and it was a room of 8 folks. I was the only Black person in the room, and a guy, I figured he was 25, maybe 26 years of age, basically said out loud that the only reason that you're in the building is because you're the team token. And no one else in the room said anything. And, I was the only one providing income. I was taking care of the mother of my children who had cancer. So, I didn't want to say anything and have to deal with all of the other issues that would come up, if I took it to our supervisors, plus the contract was just about over anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'd probably forgotten more stuff about computers than this kid knew, but he still felt that he, was comfortable enough to say something like that without any repercussions.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I don't understand how people can hear something like that and not say something. I just, maybe it's just me, but I couldn't just be silent if I hear something like that. I don't care who's talking or who says it.
Yeah, personally, I'd be one to step in and say something as well. So I support you in that.
You know, I've taught my kids to speak out, but it scares me, you know, because his friend was getting accosted by BART police and he was speaking out and he was recording it. But, you know, you still get apprehensive about like what could happen. But I've always taught him to speak out if something was wrong. But it's scary.
Being Black in America is exactly what it is. And, for the children, my belief is our best hope is people like us, the people in this group, get a chance to raise our children differently so that, when we go out and they go out to society, they can maybe pass something on better than what they've learned, or what others have learned. But I mean, I grew up in a really racially balanced neighborhood. And at the age of 13, my mother moved me to South Central Los Angeles. And when I tell you a culture shock took place, because I'd never seen, and I'm an African American, I'm Black. I'd never seen that many Black people in one place in my life. And they picked on me because where I grew up at, in elementary school and junior high, the education was further. So I mean, it's not just white people picking on Black people. Blacks are picking on Blacks. It's life in general. And unfortunately, it's sometimes it's just par for the course. I'm not saying it's okay by any means. I get frustrated and angry. I have biracial children who have to deal with these issues. But just for today, I'm grateful to be here where we are.
I'm also seeing in some of the written comments about how it is, and also what is being shared out loud, as well as the fact that it shows up at work, it's in school, it's in the neighborhood, it's, it is so insidious. And these experiences that you all are sharing are really powerful. Just want to pause one more time, see if there's anyone else who has anything they'd like to share. Okay, well, again, thank you everyone so much. I also want to take a moment, as Nicole did earlier, for us to take a breath together. This is really personal information that people have shared, and deeply impactful experiences. So if we can all breathe in together and breathe out. I'm going to now turn it back over. I believe Nicole is next.
Yes, more Nicoles. Sorry about that, folks. So this next section that we're going to go through is regarding the history of racism and housing segregation. And, I'm really thankful that you all are sharing in the chat, coming off mute. And I think discussion points and times are really important during these trainings so that we are, growing together as a community in Contra Costa County. And so this next section on racism and housing segregation, next slide, please. We present a timeline of housing discrimination. I'm not going to go through all of this. There's lots of words on these slides. Sometimes words make us uncomfortable, but this is it. This is where we are. And as recently as 2010, housing discrimination and segregation is still going on. And so there are some principles that were talked about in the video of Jamal and Kevin around racial covenants, redlining, and exclusionary zoning. And so the video did a really good job of talking about that. So I don't want to go too deep. Next slide, please, Mark. Into what those are, but just so you all know that restrictive covenants, next slide, were written into deeds between the 20s and the 40s or the 50s. In some cases, I think I've done this training twice, and in both times I did this training, there were folks who bought houses, who looked at their deeds really carefully, and these covenants are still in deeds across this country, here in California, where, Black and people of color aren't able to purchase, lease, or sell their property. And so it's still happening today. Next slide, please. And so racial restrictive covenants were deemed unconstitutional in 1948, deemed unconstitutional in 1948. It's 2023. They're still in deeds. So there's lots of work to do. Next slide, please. The video also really talked about redlining and how, between 1933 and 1968, there were maps of every city in the United States where redlining was done that kept folks of color from buying, purchasing housing. And it also refused to give mortgages to folks of color. And this happened in every city across this country. And so the next slide talks about underwriting manual that the FHA revealed that loans could not be insured to African Americans. And so these things all went in, perpetuated and also went into communities of color and made real inequalities, whether it was the criminal justice system, economic mobility. Again, the video is very profound in telling the story, but it didn't really talk about health, was another thing, and education, that folks of color were really discriminated against. And so the last concept is exclusionary zoning, where there, in the 1968 to present, there were legal zoning ordinances that forbid BIPOC folks from purchasing and occupying property. And also the government promoted exclusionary zoning. A Fair Housing Act perpetuated class-based discrimination that kept BIPOC low-income households away from access and opportunities, but gave those opportunities to white communities. Yeah, in the chat, still happening, it is. This slide also talks about The Color of Law, which was a book that really goes into detail about exclusionary zoning and its ability to cut off economic mobility for folks of color. So I think now we're going to go into, you all, this has been amazing. I don't think I've been on a training with so much interaction, you all sharing and being open and, making this training about your community, which is really, really exciting. So the next thing we're going to do is have some more conversation, and I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Thanks, Nicole. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who's going to be leading the next conversation.
Thanks, Michelle and Nicole. Hi, everyone. Mark Moore, I work with Homebase. I recognize many of the names in this training from working in different spaces and capacities in Contra Costa. So happy to be with you all today and to be talking about such important topics. I'm going to lead the next discussion, and I'm going to well, I'm going to ask my colleagues, either Nicole or Michelle, to help share the link to a different platform. We're teaching you about different platforms to have conversations on too during meetings. So that's a plus, in addition to talking about super important topics and issues related to to racial equity. We're going to use a platform called Easy Retro. And so Michelle is sharing a link, or has shared a link in the chat to Easy Retro. So it's a platform where once you open it up, you should be able to see multiple questions. And there are 3 questions based on the slides that we just looked at. And so I'm gonna go there in a second, but I'm gonna let folks pop on to that. If you have any issues, please let us know. I just wanna also frame this a little bit coming from the previous conversation or discussion, which was great. You all were sharing a lot of personal stories. Just want to acknowledge how much courage it takes to share those stories in the space with people that you may know a little bit or work with, and maybe people you don't know. So I just want to honor all of the stories that folks have been sharing. And that conversation, right, was set up because of different definitions and words that we were looking at in the different slides relating to racial equity, but just spoke to me how much those words and concepts are still playing out in real life, right? People talked about their past experiences relating to racism and prejudice and discrimination. And I bet some of those stories, I think maybe some people have been shared, are not too far in the they're not far in terms of like being too far in the past. But these are real experiences, and I think folks even shared that some of them were even happening in California. I think sometimes when we talk about racial equity, people think like that's happening in other parts of the country, or not here. Definitely not in Contra Costa County or whatever county we live in. But it seems like folks had a lot of personal stories to share, and these are pervasive issues and they're systemic. So again, it's not just limited to one space in our country or 50 years ago. It happens even still today as we're learning, both through the slides and through people's stories. So I'm going to go ahead and share the Easy Retro slide or discussion board. And there are 3 questions here. This is based on the slides that we just looked at. Feel free to respond to any or all of the questions. Again, just like earlier, if you're not comfortable sharing, no worries, but know that what you add here will be anonymous, and I'll ask folks if they want to come off mute to share. But so I just want to frame the questions a little bit. So that first question is, how might present day restrictive covenants create barriers for BIPOC seeking permanent housing? How do you see this happening in your community? We talked about more kind of blatant ways of excluding folks through policy in terms of the history of this country. So we talked about racially restrictive covenants, literally in these covenants and deeds, right? They are preventing people of color, namely Black folks, from living in certain places. Talked about redlining. You can't live here. You can't get access to loans. Maps that actually excluded people from particular locations. So today, it's not quite as blatant, but there are still ways, right? We talked about exclusionary zoning a little bit, where it's maintaining some of the same kind of approaches or thinking around property value and preventing certain people, or quote unquote, trying to protect the character of a neighborhood. And that can be seen through the lens of being racially exclusionary. So that's what that kind of question is about. Like, how do you see current practices being also restrictive and perpetuating racial inequity? So I'm going to go ahead and read some of those answers, then I'll kind of move through this. So that first question that I just asked, so read some of the responses. People of color not seen as responsible or worthy of owning property. The restrictions continue to set people of color behind. The world is evolving, but they're still left behind. Landlord or owners not wanting to rent or sell to people of color, leaving them homeless or struggling. Credit scores, don't get me started on credit scores. Why are there different credit bureaus, and why do they all get, okay, anyways. Credit scores continue to be used to discriminate against folks, and especially BIPOC folks. Huge barriers for receiving a subsidy voucher is having criminal history, which is higher for minorities due to the hyper-focus law enforcement has historically had of these communities, right? Those communities of color generally are over-policed or more policed than other communities, and that has impacts as well, for sure. Anybody want to come off mute to just focusing on this first question, the left column for now? Any folks want to say something that hasn't been said or even elaborate on something they wrote? Yep. As I scroll down, gentrification, segregation, certainly. Okay.
How
I'm gonna move
about
to,
how about people having to make 3 times the rent to get a place when we know that people of color, Black and people of color, usually make far less than whites?
absolutely. I think that's certainly valid. Yeah, having some kind of income restriction in addition to the credit score barrier, right? That can definitely perpetuate inequities that fall along racial lines. Nicole in the chat, especially in the Bay Area, ooh, housing prices in the Bay Area, right?
Only allowing single family houses to be built, not allowing density housing.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Controlling density, single family housing. All right, I'm going to move to the second question. What are the long-term effects of BIPOC being restricted from purchasing homes in suburban areas across the United States? This only adds to the current homeless issue by not allowing people of color to purchase homes or even to rent. You have segregated neighborhoods and cities. Certainly, if you look at the way communities are segregated today, that book by Richard Rothstein definitely ties that line directly to segregation from the past and how it still plays out today. Challenge in building wealth and passing it along to future generations. Yep, that video talked about that as well. Continued growing gap between classes, wealthy, below poverty, middle class, etc. It's a curse that follows from generation to generation, generational wealth, certain inability to build generational wealth. There it is. Just want to acknowledge in the chat too, Chris said the 3 times income rule isn't always upheld either, but is used as an excuse to deny some applicants. Yes. I'm going to move to the third question. Thank you all for participating. So much rich discussion. Appreciate y'all teaching us and teaching each other. How do the impacts of exclusionary zoning policies affect BIPOC households with low incomes today? Deeply impacts funding of schools in low income areas, which can impact pretty much everything in the life course of a kid. Zoning policies restrict building development to single family homes rather than multi-unit buildings. Restricted to school districts with lower funding, crowded classrooms, and less resources. Yep, something the video did a great job of highlighting. Lack of the ability to have generational wealth and access to economic opportunities. Prevented diversity neighborhoods, further normalizing separateness and preventing schools from growing up with normalized diversity. Property taxes are lower in these areas as well. Not good district representation of this community contributes to network impoverishment. If everyone in your neighborhood network is strapped, when someone in the network stumbles, there isn't enough resource in your social network to help someone catch up. Love that. Absolutely. Keeps persons of color from being able to purchase, thus keeping investors buying the whole neighborhood, having control, keeping persons of color out of the loop. Really, really good insights, y'all. Can y'all help us with our next training? This is amazing. We need to hire y'all. Yeah, thank you for participating in this discussion. Something I also want to highlight too, right? Like I assume, because when I see racial equity trainings, especially, you know, as it relates to work or my agency. I think, okay, we're going to talk about in terms of the people that we serve, right? Like so far, we're talking about these issues, and people are actually, you know, as I assume most of you are like staff of providers who serve people who are impacted by these issues every day. Y'all are bringing up stories about yourselves and about organizations you work for, communities you live in, stories growing up as kids. Like these issues are pervasive, and obviously it impacts people who are unhoused to a great degree. But I just want to acknowledge that these are real issues that impact everyone in this room, seemingly on a personal level. And I thank you all for participating in this conversation and for sharing your stories. I think that's it for this piece. Thank you all again. I'm going to pass it back, I think, to, is it Nicole or Mahir?
Nicole, just a little while longer than Mahir.
Go for it, Nicole. We're excited to hear more.
So before I turn it over to Mahir, we're going to talk a little bit about present day historical and systematic institutional norms that create barriers. You all put a lot of thought into like what those barriers are and how the systems are set up to perpetuate racial inequities across the communities that we serve. So Richard Rothstein says, today's residential segregation in the North, the South, Midwest, and West is not the unintended consequence of individual choices or of otherwise well-meaning law or regulation, but of hidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. So this just says that this is all on purpose. It's set up to do the things that it does. And so present day, some of the things that, you know, perpetuate that is like mass incarceration of BIPOCs into the criminal legal system, which then perpetuates housing instability and homelessness, deinstitutionalizing people in state mental hospitals, so just releasing folks out on the street with nowhere to go. There's been a reduction in federal investments in public housing. So I see some of my colleagues from the Housing Authority on, and so like how things have just, you know, this country doesn't prioritize housing, but we did get an influx of those emergency housing vouchers, 70,000 across the country to help those folks experiencing homelessness. So maybe we're turning that around. I think there's been HUD-VASH, there has been mainstream vouchers. So hopefully these present day norms are being turned around. And I think lastly, BIPOC folks continue to experience the following types of housing discrimination, which you all talked about, which is good. Like Mark said, you all are helping us train, you're training us, we're trying to train you, but you all are giving us the information and putting those pieces together that really speak to what's going on in your community of Contra Costa. So appraising, devaluing property value. You all talked about asking those additional questions or qualifications that make it hard for folks of color to be housed, steer to other communities where home values are lower. And then again, so I think someone put in the chat that predatory lending practices and quoting higher interest rates for folks of color. And so one of the things that we want to offer to you all, and we'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of the training, is like how communities of color experience these inequalities. And so there's all these institutions in which folks of color really experience these inequalities as it compares to folks, white folks in this country. So we could go deeper on child welfare, how that's impactful, education, the carceral system, housing, economic wealth, the racial gap, health, and the environment. I mean, each one of these points could be its own training. And so we are offering that to you all, and we'll talk more about that later in the training or during the survey exit part of this training. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Mahir. I've been talking a lot, but I really thank you all for all your participation. Mahir?
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Mahir. I work at Homebase, and now we're going to talk about how things are and why they are the way they are. So Nicole gave us a little bit of historical background, but we do want to, again, emphasize that today there still are massive racial disparities in housing across the country. So in every single state, Black people are more likely than white people to experience homelessness. So if you look at the little color code here above the map of the country, you know, the states with the least disparity still show Black people experiencing homelessness at 1.7 times the rate of white people. And you can see a lot of states in you know, the pink and the red that have a 5 or 10 times disparity between homelessness among Black people and white people. And now in the next few slides, we'll look specifically at Contra Costa, because I'm sure you all find in your work, a lot of times we can talk about like national racial disparities and history of discrimination. And people will say like, oh yeah, that's great, but like, I don't really know if it's a problem in my community. And so we're gonna spend a little time looking at some data from Contra Costa. And so here we're looking at 2020 census data and 2021 pit count data. So on the left, you can see in yellow that Black people make up 9% of the population in Contra Costa. In the middle, you can see that they make up 16% of the population living below the federal poverty line. And then on the right, you can see that they make up 36% of the 2021 pit count population. So that means that Black people are 4 times overrepresented in the homeless population compared to the general population in Contra Costa. And if we look in green, you can see again that on the left, Native American people make up less than 1% of the total population, less than 1% of the population in poverty, but 9% of the pit count population. So Native American people are about 8 times overrepresented in Contra Costa's homeless population relative to the county's total population. And on the next slide, we can do the same analysis with ethnicity. So on the bar on the left, in yellow, you can see that Latinx people make up about a quarter of the Contra Costa population. Then on the right, you can see that they make up, again, roughly about a quarter of the pit population. So they seem to be proportionally represented in the homeless population. But if we look at the middle bar, Latinx people make up 38% of the population below the poverty line. You know, and we can kind of crudely estimate that living below the poverty line increases your chances of having housing instability or experiencing homelessness. And so there's a real question of if Latinx people are being undercounted in Contra Costa's pit count, and it might actually, the state of housing instability and homelessness among the population might actually be worse than what it seems in the pit count. And actually to that point, the NAEH recently released a report saying that this is kind of a common national phenomenon, that a lot of communities see that Latinx people are undercounted in their pit counts and their homeless systems of care. And this report kind of details a lot of the reasons that may be, that these populations can face a lot of additional barriers to accessing the system of care and services. And it also proposes some kind of ideas for us to lower those barriers and create more equitable systems that allow Latinx people to access the resources and services of our CoCs. So then on the next slide, again, we'll send these slides out so you'll have access to these. Some additional resources. The middle one, again, is that report I was just talking about Latinx homelessness and underrepresentation in homeless systems. The first one is a link to, you may have seen HUD's CoC racial equity analysis tool. This one's great. You just plug in the CoC number for Contra Costa and it'll produce all of this data from census and pit count information to let you kind of play around and look at the actual state of homelessness and racial and ethnic disparities in Contra Costa. And then this last one, we didn't touch on very much, but part of the reason we see racial disparities in our homeless systems of care is something that people have known for a long time, but there's a recent kind of report studying this phenomenon that people of color, and in particular Black people, on average score lower on the VI SPDAT than white people. And so this can be a real engine of racial disparity in our homeless systems of care between who gets referrals, who gets housing, and how resources are distributed to people. Okay, so why are we here? I spent a lot of time going through this data, talking particularly about Black people and Native American people in Contra Costa. And particularly for these two demographic groups across the country, they experience higher rates of homelessness than white people. And it's largely due to longstanding historical and structural racism. And it's also due to disparities in the way in which homeless and housing services are kind of structured and administered. One of the definitions that Nicole had someone read up at the top was white dominant culture. And one of the ways this shows up is our kind of white dominant culture norms are behind a lot of the ways our service organizations and our CoCs are set up, and a lot of the ways in which we fail to adequately serve people of color is because not all cultures approach homelessness or health or care the same way as these kind of white dominant norms and the structures created by these white dominant norms. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about the importance of leading with people of color and the consequences of failing to do that. So I think this came up in the Padlet, actually, this concept of invisibility, that a lot of times racial disparities can happen and can persist because we make invisible people of color. And that's something that happens through a combination of racism and white supremacy. We tend to ignore or forget about historic and systemic causes of racial inequities and tend to focus on, say, stereotypes and supposed individual responsibility or need for particular Black people or say Native American people. And one of the functions of that is really, furthering white supremacy and oppression of people of color by ignoring, the main historical and structural forces that prevent us from being able to live full and healthy lives. Okay. Go to the next one. Again, I think invisibilizing people of color by forgetting our history and the structures that we have put in place to prevent people of color from accessing things like housing is such a crucial part of the way we all kind of get marshaled into furthering white supremacy. And okay, I think we can go to the next one as kind of an example of what happens when we forget or we ignore or we distort history. So these two reports that you can see here from 1965 and 1972 kind of paint two very different pictures of Black communities. And I think it's pretty obvious which one has taken root in our public imagination, in what we see in news, in entertainment, what we hear from political leaders, that there is often a narrative about deficit or about delinquency, rather than having a more kind of culturally competent understanding of the way different kinds of communities organize themselves and think about things like kinship and work and family, and the way ignoring or like actively distorting our history feeds into these kinds of racial stereotypes. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. And now we're going to talk about kind of the practice of racial equity. We're going to specifically be talking about liberated gatekeeping and power analysis. Okay, so one of the things that we have to do that can be kind of painful in our positions is interrogating our role as gatekeepers. So whether we mean to or not, we as people, working in the homeless system of care are agents of social control, and we hold power over people in poor communities, over communities of color, and often we wield that power for ourselves or for the agencies we work for, rather than always engaging with those communities in ways that actually restore power to them. And I think this is probably an experience many of you on the call have had, that we often feel like we have a personal intention to be accountable to these populations, to try to dismantle white supremacy. But actually, in our actual work lives, we're often accountable to the agencies or the institutions that pay us, that credential us, that evaluate our work, and decide the future of our employment. And so we can often find that even though we personally want to do good, we can feel kind of trapped in our jobs and our positions, and feel restricted from actually doing the good that we recognize should be done. And it actually takes a lot of work through an anti-racist frame and being committed to those anti-racist values to really fully being accountable to the communities in need, and being what you can call liberated gatekeepers, recognizing the power and the influence that you have and actually using it to be agents of change and restoring power and autonomy back to impacted communities. Okay, and we can talk about how gatekeeping shows up in our work. Kind of one way is a disconnection between our role, our kind of job description or position, and the potential we have for being liberated gatekeepers. As staff working, with the CoC or in agencies, you have access to, to a lot of resources, and it can often feel like, you're restricted in using those resources in the most equitable way. Another way it can show up is by not engaging in open sharing and communication about professional mistakes and harm that we may have perpetuated, either individually or as an organization, and not kind of engaging in that open dialogue about our mistakes kind of stops us from being able to fully make amends and focus on improving ourselves and actually moving the ball forward. Another way it can show up that, again, I'm sure many people have seen and experienced is racial equity kind of just in like a performative way, rather than committing to actions that'll actually materially move resources and give people power and housing. We tend to do things like tokenize. It's pretty common in continuums of care to have maybe a racial equity subcommittee, and that's often run by or staffed by a lot of people of color, or say a lived experience advisory board that is also made up of a lot of people of color. And that those committees or groups and the people in them are often kind of trotted out for specific goals or initiative, but they're not actually given the voice, the kind of professional consideration or the actual power or a seat at the table to influence decision-making at the CoC. Okay, so once we've kind of thought about gatekeeping and liberated gatekeeping as a framework for thinking about using our positions and our resources, now we can talk about power analysis. So again, the thing that poor communities, that Black communities, Native American communities, communities of color of all kinds, what they need is not, you know, additional programming. It's not a token seat on a committee. It's they need their power given back to them. They need the power and the autonomy to make decisions for themselves and to you know, lead full and free lives. And it's important, I think, also to remember that that marginalized or oppressed people really do have this power. They have the power and the knowledge to help themselves. And it can be liberatory, not just for people who are in the oppressed or marginalized groups, but it's also going to help people who are white. That, you know, one of the really insidious things about white supremacy is that, you know, it doesn't just hurt people of color, it hurts white people too. And that subscribing to these kinds of white supremacist or racist beliefs, you know, being kind of wedded to these white dominant cultural norms really prevents even white people from being able to lead full and free lives. And that, you know, engaging in these kinds of structures of white supremacy and white dominant cultural norms, you know, really alienates all of us from our own humanity. And so we can think about analyzing power. Sorry, can you go to the next slide, Mark? As a way of helping us understand why people of color experience inequities and what we can do to actually to lower barriers and decrease these inequities. So one of the things we want to do is examine institutions. So look at how various institutions might be acting as tools of oppression or white supremacy, instead of actually helping people and eliminating disparities. And that kind of allows us from shifting from thinking about like a deficit mentality or a needs analysis and to really thinking about where the power is, what institutions have it, and why they might be using their power to further oppression rather than eliminating disparities. And then, of course, as we've said, a key part of this work is restoring that power back to the impacted communities that have been historically and systemically disempowered. Okay, and on the next slide, we can kind of think of steps you can go through as you're analyzing power. The first is basically you want to identify your population of focus. And then think about what are the biases, social norms, and assumptions that that we hold about that population of focus. Then you want to think about the institutions and the structures that are charged with and given money to address this issue. And then think about institutional or systemic oppression. So think about the ways in which these institutions actually act as a tool of oppression, and identify policies, resources, programmings, and interventions that could actually be used in these institutions for their stated purpose of addressing inequities and getting us to a place of racial justice. And then after kind of thinking about things on that institutional level, to really bring it back down to you and your job and your agency. Think about your roles as gatekeepers and the potential you have with the power of your position in society and your job to really move things forward as well.
Me here. This is Jamie Jeanette. I want to see if we have like 3 minutes for me to tell a story relating to that. And if not, it's totally fine and we can move on.
Yeah, we do.
So Jamie Jeanette, community engagement specialist. One of my roles is to help set up these trainings. And I want to tell you a very quick story about the ways that white supremacy actually was fully in play in the development of this training. So I'm the gatekeeper around all the trainings that happen for the CoC, and we contracted with Home Base, and Nicole was the point lead. And from the very beginning of developing this training, Nicole and her team were really pushing us to do this and think about it differently and step out of our dominant white culture of everything is like quick and neat and things look a certain way and they happen on a certain timeline. And I kept pushing back. And then as we got closer, I, as the gatekeeper, trying to make everything conform to this white dominant culture, and as someone very committed to equity and trying to think about this all the time, ended up coming down with a really bad case of white supremacy and went so far as to literally tell Nicole, a Black woman, what I thought the slide should look like, what I thought the definition should be, how they could or should conform to this norm that we've sort of developed in our system. And props to Michelle, as a white person, sat in our last training meeting and was like, and Michelle knows me pretty well. We worked really, really well together over the years. And after that planning meeting, Michelle actually reached out to me and we had a conversation where she essentially started out by, reminding me how good I am, how much she likes me, but was really like, what was going on? Because you were not acting like your normal self. And she didn't even have to name the things I was doing. As soon as she interrupted me, I was like, oh. And I realized that I was completely running white supremacy and acting as this gatekeeper and agent of this whole system and not acting in congruence with my values or how I would, like if somebody described my behavior to me, I would have laughed. Like you as a white woman were telling a Black woman about an equity training, what the slide should look like. Are you for real? And so we were able to do repair, right? So I said, Michelle, like I owe Nicole a personal apology. Is that appropriate? We had a conversation. And here we are today, but I did harm in that moment as an agent running as an agent of the system and not in congruence with my values. And I didn't even know that I was doing it until somebody pointed it out. So I just want to say, like, this stuff is running all the time, even when we're trying to be super mindful of it. And it can happen at all levels, right? This is happening at like the big CoC level around trainings, but this can happen in our day-to-day interactions. And I think the other key is like, it was really important for me to not just like get totally shut down in shame. I was like, oh, look at that. There's another learning moment. Look what I just did, made an apology and we can move on. I could have chosen, and we could choose to do, I could choose to just ignore it. I could have chosen just to like write Nicole an apology and not open the door for more conversation. There's a lot of different ways that you can handle it, but I think the point of this is like, this is about relationships and repair, and we are all going to make mistakes, but it's important to name them when they're happening, that you see them, but also if you make a mistake, try and figure out and learn from that and I'm going to make more mistakes and I still have like shame about, no, I don't have shame. I have regret. But it was also a really good learning opportunity of like, look at what just happened. And I'm trying to think about this stuff all the time. And it's because I had this institutional lens. So I'm just going to leave it at that, but just wanted to share that. And by the way, I had permission from Nicole and Michelle both to share that information.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Jamie. That it really does take a lot of self-reflection and courage to share that with the group, and I think it is really valuable for people to hear, both because of your position in the CoC, and also as an example for how these things can go. That you're right, everyone, no matter how hard they're working or what their intentions are, everyone will cause harm at some time. And the important thing is to have tools for and to be ready to redress that harm and to repair relationships. And I think people in the beginning, when we were going through the Padlet, were kind of talking about how difficult it can be as a bystander when someone is doing harm and you want to address it. And I think this example certainly models a potential way to do that. Michelle took Jamie aside and based on the existing relationship they had, had a private conversation about this, and then Jamie was able to go have another private conversation with Nicole and talk about the incident and their relationship, and that even if it's specific to this specific incident, I think it certainly models a way that bystanders can be effective when you do see things happen. Yeah, and I see your comment in the chat, Jamie, too. It is, it is not a coincidence that Michelle, as a white woman on the call, was also the bystander to pull you aside. And I think that really is an important role for allies, particularly white allies, but also, when we're talking specifically about anti-Blackness, for everyone who's not Black to be ready to play that role and to take on, that discomfort and that burden. Does anyone else have anything they want to say about this story before we move on? Okay, great. Yeah, I think maybe we can move on. I'll turn it back over to Martin.
Thanks, Mihir. Thanks, everyone, for your participation, for being engaged. I'm going to take us through some next steps. Namely, I think, actually, I'm not going to share that because I'm going to share a poll. So I'm going to take us back to Mentimeter, and I'm actually going to probably go back so we can see, you can see where you can join Mentimeter again. Sorry, I have to find the right slide. Okay, there it is. Okay. So if you remember, we were using Mentimeter earlier, and I'm going to take us back there, but I'm going to move a couple slides back so you can see how to join. If you wouldn't mind, maybe you kept it open. If you wouldn't mind joining Mentimeter again, you can pull out your phone, you can open another browser, you could scan this QR code. There's also the website listed right there, www.menti.com, and then enter that code 8159600. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And we're going to ask you some questions and have some discussion about how folks are feeling in this moment, what might make sense as a follow-up to this conversation. Obviously can't solve racial inequity in 2 hours. And we've had some great conversation. Yeah, who knew? 2 hours wasn't going to be enough. But we want to continue the conversation. We want folks to feel like they have some ways that they can take action, both on an individual level and from a CoC standpoint. So hopefully you've been able to get into Mentimeter. If you remember this fun question, we're not going to ask it again, but I'm just wondering rhetorically where folks are in the moment. You don't have to fill this out again, but this is where people felt, what people felt before the training began. Oh, I see some people adding some thoughts or adding some new responses, and I see the number growing for option one. So I think some people at least are in a seemingly good space, which I appreciate, but I appreciate anyone being in whatever state, feeling, emotion they're in at this moment. All of it is valid. Certainly not easy conversations we're having. So I'm going to move us to some of these next steps types of questions. So related to racial equity, what topics would you like to do a deeper dive into? So there's some specific ones here. I don't know if, Nicole, I don't know if you want to add anything to what's written here in terms of the terms, liberatory framework, specifically in cycle of liberation for folks to, some people are selecting already anyways, maybe they know what it means, or maybe they're like, I want to know regardless of what that definition is. So yeah, maybe we'll just keep it at that. So if you don't know what those things are, but you're interested, feel free to click it. You can click as many, you can check as many things as you want on this list. It's a good cliffhanger. We're not going to define that thing. You have to click it. Give you a couple more seconds to respond to this. So many responses. Thank y'all. Appreciate you for sticking around for this part, because it's just as important as the other conversations we're having in terms of how we're going to move forward together. All right, looks like root causes is in the lead, but there's interest in all of these topics: history of segregation, liberatory framework, cycle of liberation. Okay. All right, appreciate y'all. We're gonna take this data and have conversations with H3 about how this could be moved forward in the CoC. But perhaps one of these topics here, perhaps the topics listed here aren't, don't represent all the topics you're interested related to racial equity. So I'm gonna move us to the next question. So the question is, what other topics related to racial equity would you like to learn? Would you like more information about? I see someone put root causes in the chat, but here's where you could just type in whatever you want to type in. Oops, I'm gonna go back one. So yeah, what other topics related to racial equity would you like more information about? I don't know why it's not letting me do it. Every time I press enter, it moves me to the next slide. I'm gonna try one more time. If it doesn't work, just know that we will we will take your answers, we'll read them, but hopefully this works. Let's see. All right. Nope, it did not. Sorry, folks, it's supposed to show your answers, but for whatever reason, it's not. But there are 17 plus answers there. I want to report that. So other topics related to racial equity, definitely take all of those into consideration. Thank you for participating in that. Wish I could show you.
Would
Technology.
pressing enter work? It says press enter to show answers.
No, that's a great observation. I try to press enter and it just moves me to the next slide. Let me try to click around one more time. Yep, see I pressed enter, and even when I hit enter on my keyboard, it does the same thing. So thank you all. I'll see if maybe if I can pull it up after this, because I can't do it while I'm sharing. But the next question is, where are the biggest issues you are seeing in our homeless system of care, so Contra Costa, related to racial equity? What are the biggest issues you are seeing? And actually, this is such an important question that I'm gonna really try to figure out how to open up these answers. So I'm gonna pause there for a minute or two just to let folks type in. What are you seeing? Where are you seeing it? Help us pinpoint some things. While I open it up in the background and see if I can show those answers. Okay. I'm gonna I can see it in a different place, but it would, if I shared my screen, it would not look appealing to y'all, I don't think. But I'm gonna read some of the answers I'm seeing aloud. This is for the question, yeah, where and what are the biggest issues you are seeing in the homeless system of care related to racial inequity? Implicit bias, criminal background, mental health and financial stability, language barrier, gatekeeping, understaffed homeless services agencies lacking representation of the homeless population. Such an important one. White privilege. The things we cannot control, bias and discrimination on the part of rental property owners and managers. Yeah, that's a big one for sure. Not enough transitional and supportive housing. Over occupancy sometimes hides homelessness, i.e. or e.g. 8 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. Lack of available housing resources for female population. Yeah, and I see you, Juno. Yes, I can definitely read out some of the previous answers. In fact, let me see if I can do it like this. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and download this PDF. So it'll just have like a snapshot of everything right now. If anybody puts any new answers in, I won't see it, I won't be able to read it right now, but we will read it later. So I am gonna go ahead and, oh wow, okay. Maybe I cannot show all of these, but I'm gonna show some of them because y'all came through. I'm so sorry for not being able to show you everything here.
Your
Can y'all see
screen is
that?
showing? Yeah, I was gonna say we can see that. So I think if
Yeah.
we scroll down, maybe we can see that. Yeah.
I don't know why
Oh no.
it's a weird shade. No, it just has 43 answers, but I
Here.
can't see them all at once. But anyways, here are some of the topics, and I don't know why it's a weird shade, y'all. Can y'all see that kind of? Okay. Apologies if you have to squint. Allyship, reparations. Ooh, love that topic. Intersectionality, more about racial discrimination, racism within the judicial system. So again, this is other topics related to racial equity that folks are interested in. Evidence-based solutions. How does H3 measure equitable program outcomes? Great question. Training managers on how to see their implicit bias, even in the nonprofit sector. This will improve employee retention. What are going to be the solutions to mediate homelessness? Yeah, definitely. Okay, so just know that there are more answers in this. And then the topics related, oh, sorry, that's what it is. It just goes down, it's multiple slides of it. I'm not gonna read them all because there's so many, but I'll just highlight a couple more. Ally practices, ooh, that's a good one. Be a good ally, good bystander, engaging community leaders in the change process, microaggressions and their cumulative impact. Yes, Jamie, we will send out the results with the slide deck and the recording for sure. Yeah, let me just scroll down because I want to go to the next question. See, so many great answers. So here's where are the biggest issues you are seeing in our homeless system of care relating to racial equity? Some of the stuff I've read up already there. See if there's anything else. Yep, lack of available housing resources. What is the percentage of white people who agree or disagree with racial equity? That's an interesting one. Black mistrust of housing systems and landlords. Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting ones here. So just note that there are some great answers there. And then I'm gonna take us back to, and Nicole or anyone on the team, tell me if I am taking too much time. Feel free. So I'm back to the Mentimeter. We did this. What are the biggest issues you are seeing in our homeless system of care related to racial equity? Definitely gonna send you all those results and also look through them. Next question is, what format would you like for future trainings discussion on racial equity? So typical training format like today, we're hour, a couple hours. We've been doing over Zoom, I think. So, or like the CoC trainings have been over Zoom. So that could be a thing. Smaller group sessions, perhaps, to have more space to share and connect with each other and dig a little deeper. If there are other ideas, throw it in the chat. Alex, with an exclamation point, in person. That's a thing, right? People are starting to do things in person, especially in this CoC. I know that's, you know, raises access issues for some folks in person. So maybe even if you do it in person, you could have a hybrid format. And for those in the council who know like quorum is a thing, yeah, this is a training, so we don't have to, it doesn't have to just be in person if there's that element. Breakout rooms to have deeper discussions. Hear you, Tony. Okay. Just curious if someone would have some like really innovative way of doing a training in the chat. I thought I was gonna learn something and then take credit for it. I'm just kidding. All right, well, it seems like most folks are okay with this training format, but it seems like there's some interest in having some smaller group discussions, breakout rooms perhaps. All right. So something to consider. Thank y'all. Appreciate you. I think Jamie J, you wanted to share a link for a survey too. Go for it if you want
I
to
do.
speak a little bit.
I'm gonna I just put a link in the chat. It's like not a chat in the link. To just our regular sort of how was the training? Did it meet your needs? Do you have suggestions? We got a lot of this. They actually captured a lot of information, but also just wanted to do our sort of regular check-in about how it was. If you have any things that you think about later too, we can pass those comments along. And we're gonna send the survey link out with all the other stuff we're gonna send you in the next day or two. When will we pick up regarding this training again? JC, that's such a good question. So I can just speak as my gatekeeper role. So thinking about our ongoing trainings, we have some things that we are scheduled to do in our regular monthly slot for like CoC required things, but we're going to talk with Homebase and look at the results and see what came out as possible next topics. And then they would probably not, the equity training would probably not be in this regular meeting slot. We would probably create a separate one. So long way to say, stay tuned.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, appreciate y'all for participating in all the polls, the conversation. I know Jamie dropped the survey link in the chat if you want to bump that again, because so folks can see it. But just want to thank everybody so much for your time, for your engagement. We know this is not an easy or quote unquote exciting conversation for all people to want to have. But it's really, really important to talk about these issues. And as you can see from how the conversation went today with folks, there's a lot of, personal stories. This, I'm sure for some people can be very, very triggering even. So I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate you all and hope that, you even continue to take care of yourselves. You take a deep breath like we have been doing, but also, look forward to and expect and hold, the CoC accountable to continuing these conversations around racial equity. And anything any of the other trainers want to say before we part ways? It's already been said. I think the folks who participated in the training said it all the best. So thank you so much. We'll send all the materials to you and have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. She's fantastic.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.